Hey guys, today I'm going to be going over the best in slot PvP gear in AQ, and the goal of the video is not only for you to know all of the good items in AQ for PvP, but also know which items might be pretty difficult to get a hold of and what alternatives you have to use in their place. And to start, I want to go over, the set bonus. If you are, and the big deal is the 5 set, 15% increased damage to your eviscerate. If you are a hemo rogue that is using cold blood in addition to hemo, basically if you're using swords or maces or fist weapon, you are going to want to use this 5 set no matter what. If you are dagger, you're likely going to want to use this set. However, you can use just the 3 set if you wanted and just use individual better items for the shoulders and the boots. You do lose a little bit of stats on the shoulder and the boot slot for Death Dealer for opting for that option, but you do get the set bonus, and so it's just going to depend on how much you use Eviscerate. And me personally, I think when I press Eviscerate on Dagger, even though I don't press it much, it's usually when I'm going in for a kill, and an extra 15% damage really could be the difference between getting a kill and not getting a kill. So even as Dagger, I think the 5 set is going to be worth it. And the only situation where I could see the 5 set potentially not being worth it is if you are you have a lot of the rank epic set, and fitting in that 2 set could definitely outshine the 5 set if you are a dagger rogue that has the epic ranking gear. So on to the individual items now, and we'll start with the helm. Now this head, you can see in comparison to Bloodfang Hood, it's not really that much different. You lose the resistances, but you do gain a little bit of strength, you gain a little bit of stamina, but a little bit of agility too. So it's just like a small stat increase across the board, and then you also get 1% hit. And I guess while I'm here, I can talk about hit. Hit is actually pretty good in PvP. It's not as good as crit once you have 5 to 6% hit. However, it is still going to increase the damage of your auto attacks past that point, and it's not as good as crit. It's probably not as good as half a crit, but it's about as good at, a little less than half a crit, I would say you should value your hit at. And it is going to increase your damage, especially when you're in long stun locks. And it's really not to be overlooked. So this is a decent upgrade over Bloodfang Hood when you consider like all the small stat increases, and definitely the best helmet available. There is another head that drops in AQ. This has a ton of stamina on it, so if you wanted a really, really tanky head, you could use this. I think Death Dealer is way better. It's only 9 more stamina, and you lose a lot of other stats, but this has dodge on it too. If you want to have a really, really tanky head, you could use this. It has a lot of armor as well, but I guess keep that in mind. Next, onto the neck. Now, this neck I think is the best neck come AQ, and it has crit, attack, power, stamina. It's really, really good. However, warriors are going to want this. There is a similar neck that drops in ZG that has no stamina and 4 less attack power. And so you might be able to convince some of your warriors to use that instead and let you have this. But in most situations, this is an item that the warriors are going to get first in a lot of guilds. But if you are able to pick it up, it is very good. I do also want to mention the Master Dragon Slayer Medallion is really good option as well, and could potentially be better than the Barbed Choker depending on how much you like stamina. In general, I would say, in my opinion, this item is better. However, if you do like a really tanky setup, you could use the Master Dragon Slayer Medallion. Now, a lot of you probably aren't going to have the Master Dragon Slayer Medallion because you probably took the Master Dragon Slayer Ring, which is also a really good item in PvP. So that would make sense. And so if you can't get the Barbed Choker and you don't have this medallion, another option is the Choker of Sifting Sands. This is from the last boss in AQ20. It's just you loot his item and then you can turn it in for a quest reward. So this is something that shouldn't be terribly hard to get. If you just do AQ20 a bunch of times, eventually you'll get it. And this is a very good neck. And then I guess if you don't have that, you could use a world boss neck. This has a lot of stamina on it. And then if you don't have this one, you could use the Ahn'Qiraj neck still, and that's a pretty good neck in PvP as well. onward to the shoulders. Now, like I mentioned, the shoulders are worse than taut Dragonhide shoulders, especially if you value a lot of stamina. You could use these Death Dealer shoulders, even if you have taut Dragonhide, if you're going for a more glass cannon build and you are going for a lot of damage in favor of or over having more stamina. So you could do that. But I personally am going to keep my taut Dragonhide shoulders equipped until I have the 5 set. But that is the new shoulder. Now there's one more shoulder that does drop. It's worse than the Arathi Basin shoulders and taut Dragonhide, but there is this thing called Mantle of Wicked Revenge that drops from Thancred, so that's something you could keep an eye out for too. On to the cloaks. Now, Cloak of the Fallen God is the best cloak, but it's going to be really hard to get. You need to get this as a quest reward from Cthulhu. When Cthulhu dies, he always drops his eye, and if you turn in the Eye of Cthulhu, you get to choose between 3 items. It's just like the Nefarian head or the Onyxia head. And the issue with Cloak of the Fallen God is that the caster ring is really amazing, and even the healing neck is pretty good as well. And so the chances of you getting this are really low. Most guilds are going to be prioritizing that item to casters and to healers first. So it would take a really long time to get this in most situations. So while it is the best item, in all likelihood, you're going to be aiming for the Cloak of Concentrated Hatred. And this is a very good cloak, only a little bit worse than Cloak of the Fallen God. So it's not that big of a deal to use this instead. And definitely a great item. Now, if you don't have this, you could still go with Cloak of the Firemaw. Now, if you do have Cloak of the Firemaw already, it's up to you whether or not you want to even worry about this item. It's not that big of a difference between Cloak of Firemaw, so you keep that in mind. And then lastly, there's another option in AQ. You can get this Cloak of the Golden Hive. This again is going to be a stamina heavy piece, so this is something that you would aim for potentially if you really wanted a tanky build, and you might even value over something like Cloak of Firemaw. But I really couldn't see this being better than Cloak of the Fallen God, or likely even Concentrated Hatred. But if you love stamina, this is something you could keep an eye on. You can snag it after the tanks have it, and it might be easier to get than the Cloak of Concentrated Hatred, and definitely will be easier than the Fallen God. So you can keep your eyes out for that as well. Now on to the chests. Now this chest is insane, and I want to stress that this is the best piece of tier gear for PvP from AQ, which is very different from PvE, because in PvE it's actually one of the worst upgrades. But here in PvP, because it has an insane amount of stamina and just a ton of stats, like you can see Bloodfang chest has 17 stamina. This is going to be an 11 stamina upgrade, while also giving more agility, more strength. And while you do lose hit, obviously in PvP hit isn't as good as with raiding, so it's not that big of a deal to lose 1% hit. So just massive upgrade in the chest, really good piece of tier, and definitely the biggest upgrade out of everything that you can upgrade in AQ when it comes to the tier pieces. So the other thing I will mention in AQ is the Vest of Swift Execution. Now this is a little bit better than like tier 1 chest or the Zandalari Madcap chest, so you could use this while you're waiting for the tier chest if you wanted. But all in all, it's going to be worse than Bloodfang in PvP, and it's not very good, not much better than the previous option. So I wouldn't bother with this, but thought I'd mention that this does exist in AQ. On to the wrists. Now we have the Karaji Executioner bracers. Now these bracers are actually barely better than Bloodfang bracers, so this is not like a really important item to keep an eye out for, but it is a little bit better than the Bloodfang bracers, and definitely individually better. But I will mention that as you are gearing up and you're complete, you might not have everything yet, I would actually use the Bloodfang bracers over the Karaji Execution bracers if it would be the difference between having the 3 set or not having the 3 set. So I definitely would not break the Bloodfang 3 set to use these bracers. And while you're gearing up, using the Bloodfang 3 set is really an attractive option because the Bloodfang gloves are really good come AQ as well. So just keep that in mind there. And then everything else is just existing risks, not the other risks in AQ to worry about. Next, we'll go over to gloves, since I just mentioned them. We have the Bloodfang gloves. Now, they are not the individual best item. And what I mean by that is the stats on the gloves of the Hidden Temple are actually better. You can see you're going to have 2 more stamina, you're going to have 1 more agility, and you're only going to lose 1 strength. And so I think you'd rather, take that trade. And it also, you can mention it has a lot more armor. And so the gloves of the Hidden Temple are slightly better in terms of pure stats, but Bloodfang gloves make you immune to disarm. And so considering they're only barely worse than gloves of the Hidden Temple, and you can potentially have the 3 set with Bloodfang as you're gearing up, I think these are definitely the best gloves in, even with AQ being out. And I would use these over gloves of the Hidden Temple basically in all situations, with the one exception being if I know for certain that I will never be disarmed in the near, I know I won't be disarmed. So maybe if you're dueling something that cannot disarm you, that could be an option, I guess. But in general, I would use the Bloodfang gloves as your best option. Next, we have the belt. Now, the belt of Never Ending Agony is a huge upgrade. It's an amazing piece. It's one of the best upgrades in AQ in terms of the armor, just behind the chest in terms of how big of an upgrade it is. And you can see that over Bloodfang belt, you're gaining stamina, you're gaining a ton of attack power, you're gaining hit. It's just really, really good. And one of the most important pieces to try and get a hold of. And I guess the only other thing I can mention, there's one other belt in AQ that has like parry on it. It's not very good, so don't worry about that belt. And that's I think Feral Druids won it, but for Rogue, it's not very good. So if you do see that belt in AQ, don't worry about it. There's a lot of other items that are better than it from previous content. Next, we've got the legs. Now, the legs are a really big upgrade as well. In terms of the tier, they're the second biggest upgrade behind the chest. And that's just because if you look at the Bloodfang legs, you can see an 8 stamina increase. The agility is like one more, but you get 7 more strength. All in all, decent stat upgrade, great piece of legs, and nothing else in AQ to keep an eye out for in the leg slot. Next, we have boots. Like I mentioned previously, the Death Dealer boots are actually individually worse than Shadow Flame, and Shadow Flame have a decent bit more stamina. They're going to give you more attack power. You are going to lose some crit by using boots of the Shadow Flame, but you're going to gain some hit as well, increase your auto attack damage. So all in all, I think boots of the Shadow Flame are the better option. However, if you love your crits, this is going to give you more crit. And if, stamina is not as big of a priority to you, this, one of the cons is the stamina. So in most situations, you're going to want to use this once you have the 5 set and use the Shadow Flame boots until then, but you can opt for these instead, regardless of set bonuses, because they are pretty good. And I could see you wanting to pair this with, to get the 3 set. I could see reducing the evasion cooldown being worth using this boots over Shadow Flame for sure. So the only thing I will mention for boots, though, there's another pair of boots, the Hive Tunneler's boots. They have a crazy amount of stamina. So if you're someone who loves really high stamina, just if you're the type of person who likes the medallion and likes the Golden Hive Cloak, this is an option for you too. It's a crazy amount of stamina, but overall, a worse pair of boots than both Shadow Flame and Death Dealer. On to the rings. Now, the rings don't necessarily change for the best in slot rings. Master Dragon Slayer ring is still really good. Archimedos Ring of Reckoning is still really good. However, there is another option. The Ring of Kiraji Fury is about as good as the Dragon Slayer ring, and it is a little bit worse, in my opinion, than the Ring of Reckoning. However, if you are going for a more aggressive, more high damage build, you could definitely swap out this ring for the Kiraji Fury ring. It's just this ring has a crazy amount of stamina. So this is definitely a very, very good ring. You definitely want this ring if you did end up taking the Master Dragon Slayer medallion and you don't have the Master Dragon Slayer ring. This ring is really, really good. But again, this could be potentially hard to get. Warriors will probably want this, so this might not be the easiest to get. And in my situation, I'm probably going to end up sticking with the Dragon Slayer ring just because this ring's probably going to be hard to get. Now, there's another ring that, actually there's a few more rings. The next best ring that comes from AQ is Ring of the God Slayer. This is pretty good. I'd say it's worse than the other 3 rings I've talked about, but if you don't have those, you can use the Ring of the God Slayer. Very good ring. There's also a ring called the Signet of Bronze Dragonflight. It's the rep ring that you upgrade, and as you get higher reputation, it keeps increasing in stats. And at max rank, this is actually pretty good. And again, worse than the other 4 rings we've now talked about, but it is the 5th best ring, so you can use that as well. And then after that, the other rings are existing in the game. Now on to, I guess I might save the trinkets for last. I guess I'll go over to ranged real quick. Basically, nothing really new in terms of ranged weapons. Heart Striker is still the best. Dragon Breath Hand Cannon is the 2nd best. You can use this crossbow, however, from AQ, but it's worse than these 2 items. These are generally pretty easy to get, not very competitive, but if you don't have those yet, you can use this crossbow. It's pretty good, and 3rd best ranged weapon. On to the weapons. Now this is where things get exciting, and we have Death Sting. So Death Sting is really, really good. You see the weapon skill, you might think, okay, this is a raiding weapon, but because of the slow speed, because of the high DPS, the high damage, the stamina, the attack power, this is definitely the best one-hander for daggers. Definitely the best main hand, and it's a huge difference. The 2nd best option is Pugio, and Pugio does a lot less DPS. It is a faster dagger, which isn't necessarily good for using ambush and using backstab. So even though it might seem like Death Sting is like a PvE or a raiding dagger, just know that it's the best PvP dagger as well, and you don't actually replace it until Naxxramas on the very last boss. King's Fall is the only better main hand in PvP, so you're going to use this a very long time, and it's really good. Definitely the single best item in AQ if you play daggers, and the most important item even in PvP. Like I mentioned, the 2nd best option is Pugio, and Pugio is also going to be the best in slot offhand, regardless of your spec. It just has a lot of stats and stamina, high DPS, just really, really good offhand, and going to be best in slot up until Nax comes out. Now for a Hemo weapon in the main hand, there is a new upgrade over CTS, and you might have heard a lot of people talking about like the difference between CTS and the Kiraji Ripper, and that they're pretty similar. And the main difference is the speed, and this is a 2.8 speed sword. But this is actually really important for Hemo builds because Hemo is not normalized, and it's kind of a confusing thing to go into. But long story short, the slower a weapon is, the more damage it does with Hemo, and that's aside the point of the damage of the weapon. So that means when you use Ancient Kiraji Ripper, you are going to actually get an increase over CTS because it does more weapon damage with each hit, and the slow speed is also going to give you more damage from your attack power. So long story short, might not seem like the biggest upgrade, but because of the slow speed, this is going to be significant for Hemo, and an item you definitely want to pick up. And like I mentioned before, Hemo rogues are going to want to use Pugio in their offhand as well if you can get it. Now, on to the trinkets. And I guess for trinkets, it's really going to come down to, subjective. There's a lot of different usages for these trinkets, so it comes down to how you like to play the game. I personally like to have a bunch of trinkets that I carry around and swap them around as I'm PvPing. And so I will go over all. There's actually quite a few trinkets. There's 5 that are going to come out with AQ. So we'll start with Jom Gabar. Now this trinket is really good. It is not better than Renataki in like almost every situation. Renataki is way easier to use, helps you use your combos. It's so good. However, I do think Jom Gabar is probably the second best just pure damage trinket that you can use. Earth Strike is easier to use. However, Jom Gabar has much higher upside. And so you can sap a target, press Jom Gabar, it'll take you out of stealth. But then you can go back in stealth and open with like cheap shot once 10 seconds have passed and Jom Gabar has ramped up and given you a huge amount of attack power. So I think this is a really exciting item, especially with items like Gouge, items like Blind, Sap, things that you can do to essentially stall out and not fight the enemy while waiting for Jom Gabar to ramp up. And then when you're at, ending the duration, right, coming towards the end, and you have that huge attack power bonus, you can do a big burst of damage. So really cool item, kind of tricky to use, but really good. Like I said, Earth Strike is going to be the easier version of that, and you get this through reputation, so this is something you can more, I guess, guarantee to get. Jom Gabar is going to be hard to get because a lot of hunters are going to want this. And I didn't mention, but this ring is probably going to be hunter priority as well, so just keep that in mind. Now, for Earth Strike, long story short, same thing as Jom Gabar. You press it, all your abilities are going to hit harder. Great trinket, probably the third best trinket in terms of just pure damage behind Renataki and Jom Gabar, so really good. Next, we have the Burrower's Shell. Now, this item's insane. It's like an arena grandmaster, or it's like the Defiler Talisman from Revered in Arathi Basin, but is a 2-minute cooldown instead of, I think, 3 minutes for Defilers, and instead of like 30 minutes for AGM. And it also lasts 20 seconds, which is longer than those other two shielding trinkets. So this thing is something that you're probably going to use a ton if you do end up getting it. I could see in Battlegrounds using this basically every 2 minutes. There's a lot of duels. You're scared of getting blown up and dying really fast. This is something really good that you could use in a lot of matchups. So the Burrower's Shell, all in all, very, very good. Hard to compare with some of the damage trinkets in terms of value because it just does something completely different. But this is definitely very good for PvP. And something you're probably going to use off cooldown in Battlegrounds and stuff. Next, we have the Shard of the Fallen Star. Now, I think this item is a little bit underrated, and you can look at a lot of the items that increase your attack power or increase your attack damage. There's a lot of trinkets that you can use in the game that give you those buffs, but this does something kind of unique. It's instant damage. It's instant damage at range, and that's something that rogues really can't do. And it's a decent amount of damage as well. So I think this is actually going to be pretty good. This is something you can fit into one-shot combos, and it doesn't appear that it shares a cooldown with other trinkets. We'll have to wait and see when it actually comes out. But like on Wowhead, it doesn't list this item as sharing a cooldown with other trinkets. So you will likely be able to use this in combination with a lot of other trinkets. And that is a big pro because items like Renataki actually put a lot of your other your trinkets on a 10-second cooldown. And so you can't necessarily use them together. And items like Jom Gabar and Zandalari Hero Medallion, they're like a 20-second duration, and they put your other trinkets on a 20-second cooldown. So if this item does indeed not share a cooldown, this is definitely something that you can use to one-shot people. It's just, I think this is going to be a really good item, and because it's magic damage too, it helps against higher armor targets to burst them down as well. So a lot of usages for this, pretty neat. But a lot of its value is going to come down to whether or not it shares a cooldown with other trinkets. Because if it does, well, then it's in the same boat with a lot of other trinkets, right? Great, but you can't necessarily use two damage trinkets at the same time because they share a cooldown. And by share a cooldown, I mean they put the other trinket on a short cooldown, so you can't use them at the same time. It doesn't actually start the full cooldown duration. I guess lastly, we'll get to the Tentacle of Cthulhu. Now, this trinket, it depends how hard this is going to hit. I've heard that this hits pretty hard. It's not supposed to move. The tentacle is supposed to, be stationary. as you'd expect for a tentacle. And it's going to be very, very strong for a rogue because rogues can keep a target stationary, right? You can cheap shot them, kidney shot them, boom, right there. That's 10 seconds of them taking damage from this. So all in all, I think this is going to be pretty good. Just is going to depend how much damage it does. It might not be as annoying as Barov Peasant Caller, because Barov Peasant Caller is, a really big nuisance. Summons 3 adds, and they actually follow the enemy. But depending on how much damage this does, this could definitely be an incredible trinket, especially in a stun lock, especially if it doesn't share a cooldown, which I don't expect it to. With a lot of these trinkets, you'll be able to stun lock someone, drop the tentacle, get a bunch of damage in, and then use another damaging trinket and burn them down. So this trinket could be very, very powerful depending on how hard it hits. I also really wanted to talk about Badge of the Swarm Guard, because this is probably the best trinket of all of the AQ trinkets in PvP, for the reason that it stacks with every other trinket. And you can check the Wowhead comments on this item, and there's a lot of comments confirming that, from back in the day, confirming that it does stack with Zandalari Hero Medallion, that it stacks with Jom Gabar, that it stacks with Earthstrike. So this is something that is really powerful because you can use it alongside one of those damaging trinkets and just do a ton of damage. Now the armor is going to stack up to a 1200 armor shred, and 1200 armor is, for reference, about a 4 combo point expose armor, and without the talent. So it's pretty significant, and it's 30-second duration, which is quite a while, a pretty big window to use the trinket. And you do have to build it up with your attacks, but you can also change targets. So this is something that you could use in like a battleground, and you'll get the armor shred. You can use another damage trinket and swap around, hit different targets, and have a huge amount of damage coming out. Just like any armor reducing effect, it is going to be better against squishy enemies. So this is something that you're going to want to use to its most effectiveness against clothy enemies, and it's not going to be as strong against warriors or paladins or something like that, but still a very, very powerful trinket, and going to be really, really good. Probably the best trinket out of all of these, just because you can use it with other things. But that's pretty much everything. This was pretty thorough. Went through all the options, all of the choices. Let me know if you have any questions. Let me know if I missed anything. And I was also thinking about maybe doing a priority video on like what items to focus on. But let me know if you think that'd be interesting to any of you guys. If you're a PvP player, what to look at for raid. But that's all I've got for today. Thanks for watching.